Jonas Eidevall has resigned as Arsenal manager. The news literally dropped about 20 minutes ago and sent us all into a bit of a frenzy in the studio. Director of Women's Football, Claire Wheatley, said, "We'd like to say a huge thank you to Jonas for his hard work and dedication to Arsenal Football Club over the past 3 years. Jonas has brought us back-to-back trophies in the last 2 seasons, together with many memorable moments on the pitch. Assistant coach Renee Sleggers will take charge of the team on an interim basis." Rach, I mean, it kind of felt like the news we were expecting, but maybe not the timing.
Jesus, like we're literally about to get, it dropped minutes before the England squad dropped. So cheers for that. It's not like,
thank you, Arsenal
like everyone's
comms.
already scrambling.
A day later just would have been fine.
To me, felt like it was coming, but maybe not right now. I thought maybe they'd wait for the international break and, get through these last 2 games before the international break. So that is a bit of a surprise. Tough time at Arsenal. Tough time at the weekend against Chelsea. It just felt like the vibe didn't feel the same at the ground. Fans are certainly showing their frustrations, but, I think it's indicative of a longer term issue that Arsenal have been having, I think. And I think should he had stayed on this season, he had to win something more than the Conti Cup. And I think when you've started the league in the way you've started, that looks less and less likely. And, I think they gave him that chance at the beginning of last season, just before they got knocked out of the Champions League. And I think that just added more pressure. And realistically, have we seen enough progress with Arsenal under Jonas Eidevall?
Definitely. So to add a bit of context, I mean, he joined in June 2021 from FC Rosengard, won the League Cup, obviously, with Arsenal in 2023 and 2024, then got them to the semi-finals of the Champions League in 2022-23 season for the first time in 10 years. There has obviously been some success under Jonas. It's not been a completely disastrous run by any means. And he has really found a lot of favour with fans over the years. But I think this past year, this past season, I think we have seen a bit of a turning point, haven't we? And I feel like it kind of reached a head this weekend of the game at the Emirates with Chelsea. We were both there. I mean, the devastation that we saw across the faces of all the players on the pitch after the game, they were visibly upset. Yeah. It looked like Leah Williamson, you said you saw Emily Fox
looking pretty upset.
In tears.
Beth Meads.
It didn't feel like a nice atmosphere. And I think obviously like people get their cameras out, they zoom in and you can kind of see bits of the team talk and people's faces. And it just looked like a really deflated squad. The energy seemed super low.
It's tough to watch, and it's tough to watch when you can see them during the game. Like, they're trying, you know what I mean? And it's almost like the harder you try, the more it's not working. And it's like they're trying what they've been told to do, even though it's not working. And I think that was an area of the game that feels like it's slowly come out of the Arsenal team, is the freedom and creativity. And I think that's potentially what stifled them, because it's almost like they feel like they can't try and do something be free and try something different if it's not working. It's almost like they have to just keep doing the same thing over and over, hoping for a different result. And I think under Jonas, under that period, he had that first season where he's a new manager, you've a bit more leeway, I suppose. Then you had that season with all of the injuries. Yeah. And, you get bloody leeway there when you've got all these ACL injuries and you think, wow, look how they've performed in spite of that.
For sure.
Then you had last season where you're like, okay, this is a time where we need to start seeing progress.
Yep.
And maybe didn't really see that progress, didn't qualify for the Champions League. I appreciate they won the League Cup, but, you're kind of going, okay, well, actually, are things improving? Arsenal's still having those struggles in front of goal at times. And then you start this season and it's a step backwards.
Yep.
And I think, there was going to come a time where they had to look to try and either save their season or ride it out. And I think perhaps it's that progress piece that made them make that decision. And it's actually something that Jonas Eidevall speaks about a lot, is about progress. And I just think there hasn't been enough with the quality of players in that squad.
I think it's the quality of the players that is the most baffling thing. When you look at, you've brought in Caldente this year, but you've also got so many firepower and attacking options to go. Well, you've got Russo, you've got Blackstenius, you've got Mead, you've got Caitlin Ford, you've got all these amazing, incredible players. Your back line is sick. Like, you've got Daphne Van Domselaar in goal now as well. And I just think why it wasn't piecing together. There was a lack of confidence there, and I think it came from essentially what looks like a bit of more of the culture than actually being the on the pitch stuff. I mean, these players are technically gifted, but there wasn't a translation of that confidence on the pitch that we ever really saw. And I feel like that again was something that we saw this Saturday, and I was starting to think, maybe the writing is on the wall.
Literally, Chloe.
And talking of which, the writing was definitely very much on the wall. There was a bit of graffiti outside the Emirates Stadium. It said Jonas out in massive white letters that had been painted on after the game. Obviously, fan frustrations have been bubbling away over the last 3 games, but this really felt like, to me, a bit of a turning point, a very significant shift in almost like women's football culture. I don't want to sort of place too much emphasis on it, but it felt to me like quite a poignant moment in that kind of shift between women's football culture fandom not being nicey. It's always been a bit punchy. It's always been really feisty and fiery. But at the same time, there was that step over the line, I think, for me in that post. I mean, you're talking about a human being, regardless of how you feel about Jonas and his managerial tactics and, how he's sort of what he's getting out of the team. I think you cross a line when you vandalise a space in the community that is supposed to be like one of the nicest homes, one of the most comfortable, safest spaces in women's football, the Emirates, and you vandalise a space like that and you make a personal comment about someone who is a human being, regardless of how you feel. I mean, what were your thoughts about that? Because people have made fun of it, and I don't know whether I'm being like an absolute mood kill, but I don't think it's funny.
I was surprised by it, purely because, as you say, we've not maybe seen that level of frustration exerted before. But I think with what you're saying about that kind of shift, it's not just that. Mm-hmm. I think we're seeing that more so online, a lot more.
For sure.
And there's been some pretty nasty stuff going around, which personally I can never wrap my head around. If you're a fan of a team, feeling comfortable to take it beyond the pitch and make it personal. And I've seen some stuff that I won't repeat on here. Personal things about players and saying some really
vile,
actually disgusting stuff, which just, I think it just is horrific, and it is kind of seeping into areas of the game. And yeah, as you say, and Jonas actually touched on it, like he can understand fans being emotional after games, and whether you win, whether you lose, every right to be emotional, to be frustrated, to vent your frustrations, but there is a line, and I don't think it needs to be explained where that line is.
Yeah, for sure. What you're doing is offensive and it's abusive. It was really interesting actually to hear the comments of Beth Meads. She said post-match, we're in a really tough place at the moment. People need to help us a little bit. There's not so many nice things being said about us as a team right now, which is that's kind of upsetting to hear that. Yes, 100%. When a team is not performing badly, we can't have this kind of like wholesome, toxic positivity where we're just saying, oh, well, go again. Women's football's amazing. That was amazing. Come on, girls. Like you can criticise a team, but there is definitely a line in which you start to say ridiculously offensive, abusive, vile, disgusting things about players and managers that it takes it into a different realm. And I don't want to see that creep in to the women's football space. Like I
mean, it's in.
That's the heartbreaking thing for me. I feel like there was a shift. Probably this. I don't know whether I've just been blind to it.
Yeah,
but
it's
very
been
recently.
creeping in. It's been creeping in over the last couple of seasons, and I imagine you as a player, the one person who immediately knows if you're not playing well is you.
All day, like very aware.
The players are fully aware that it's not clicking. It's not like they're out there not trying or not bothering. It's not clicking. They're aware of that. They're under a huge amount of pressure. They want to win. They know they can do better. They know the fans are going to be irritated. And yeah, fans will vent frustration. Fine. But as you say, some of the stuff, particularly about her that has been said, has been so far off the line you can't see it anymore.
I would say, I mean, I think we talked about this before on a podcast, maybe last season, where I talked about a little bit about the abuse that I'd suffered on the pitch during a Spurs game about my weight. And that's something that this was like 5 years ago.
Sticks with you.
And it's something that stuck with me even now, 5 years later. As a reasonable, rational adult who knows that there are idiots who will say stupid things, it's definitely a comment that has stuck with me. So I think it's kind of that lack of understanding and appreciation that the comments you're making, we don't want to see it in the women's space, but also that these players are taking it home. And you could see these players are visibly upset. And that wasn't just through what was happening with Jonas. This is like seeing wave after wave of criticism being levied at them across social media. So it doesn't fill me with a lot of hope that this hostility is going to be capped there.
Yeah, but I'd also say it's not a women's game thing. We just don't want to see it. It's not something you should be doing in any walk of life, for sure. I think.
Sorry, yes, that's a very good point to make. Apologies.
No, it's just, it's tough. And like, you touch on, Beth Meads is a good example of someone who's frustrated in the system she's being made to play in, because she is a creative, free-flowing player that we're used to seeing. And I think within the current system, it feels very rigid. And, we're often seeing her invert in the game. And you're like, that's not the best use of her, and it's not getting the best out of her. And then she's getting the abuse for being out of form. And to be honest, I think a lot of the players are struggling with form. Yep. But I also think it's a collective, the longer this period goes on for them, the harder it gets. And, maybe it's just a case, you tell me as a player, when you're in a rut, you just need that one thing to go right for you. Is that sometimes the case where you're just like, maybe it's you have a game where you score a load of goals, or you beat a rival, or just something goes right that kind of takes a little bit of that pressure off?
I think the only analogy I can make is that it starts to feel a little bit like a cloak, and like every time something negative happens, you get a bad result, you let it, like on a personal level as well, you let in a goal that you shouldn't have, you've made a mistake on the pitch, you're being benched or whatever it is, or you don't get on well with the coach, like the cloak seems to feel heavier and heavier each week. And sometimes all you need is, like you said, like one of those moments where you win, you say, okay, well, like let's restart, let's reset, like what happened, like let's have a fresh start. And I think that's what Arsenal kind of are in need of. Let's talk a little bit about the game at the weekend. It's quite hard to...
Not, because it feels like the way it started, you thought, this is the worst possible start. Like, you had the Everton game, the draw, and you thought, right, they need to go out. If they go and they beat Bayern, it's really going to buoy them for Chelsea.
Yeah.
Battered by Bayern.
Didn't happen.
Yeah. Then you think, okay, this makes the Chelsea game all the more difficult, all the more pressure on the game. They need to at least be in the game. And that opening 20 minutes, I thought, it's going to be another 5-0.
Yeah,
like
all day.
Chelsea came out flying. Arsenal, I don't know, it was almost like they were just so caught on the back foot that they couldn't find any foothold in the game.
100%.
Different story in the second half. But equally, you could almost put your house on them not scoring. It just felt like that. I said to the person next to me, if this was reversed and Arsenal were 2-1 and Chelsea were pressing the way Arsenal were pressing and, knocking on the door the way Arsenal were, you could almost put your house on them getting the equaliser.
All day.
But because of the way things have been going for Arsenal, it was like the harder they tried and the more open a chance became, the less likely they were to score.
Yeah, it felt like the heart had kind of been taken out of them a little bit, and it was really hard to put your finger on what that actually looked like.
So hard.
But it was just like that spark wasn't there. That's the only thing you could say. And I think, it felt like a very small but significant nail in the coffin kind of happened in the 4th minute. I mean, we've got to talk a little bit about Myra Ramirez's
the overhead kick
goal. I was calling it a bicycle kick. There's a very fine line in definitions between bicycle kick and overhead kick, but 4th minute, obviously, already not a very strong start, but a beautiful goal from Ramirez. What I would say, just to touch on slightly, Van Domselaar, I would say she could have done more. 100%. It wasn't a kick with any particular force in it. The speed of it was really, really slow. It was looping, kind of almost arching. In a way, it kind of looked like a little bit of a high cross into the box. I think Daphne Van Domselaar thought that it was going to go over the bar, but I don't. Even if you think that way, it was really close, and you definitely should have just been trying to put a hand just to make sure it was definitely going over. And in this case, it obviously wasn't. So yeah, I did feel like she was a little bit planted to the spot. It was very sort of Zinsberger-esque, if I'm going to be really honest. And I you know how I hate criticising goalies.
The difficult thing as well for Arsenal was it was a set piece. Yeah. And they've struggled so much with set pieces this season. I think the one they scored against Bayern was the first one they scored. They then conceded 3 set pieces, I think. And it was really foretelling because Jonas Eidevall was interviewed by the BBC before the match, and he said, we need to not concede from set pieces. And 4 minutes in, they conceded from set piece. And I was just like, it almost like it was a perfect example of what was going wrong at Arsenal.
For sure.
You know, this is what we're trying to do and this is what we're not doing. Do you know, that kind of way, in such a short space of time?
A self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
And then Sandy Baltimore obviously followed that up with a header. That was her first Chelsea goal. Lauren James with the assist. Caitlin Ford obviously then pulled one back for
Lovely goal for
Arsenal.
her.
Beautiful goal, but obviously not enough to get those 3 points. And for me, I think it kind of felt like that game summed up what essentially looked like the end of Eidevalls. It was very telling, but I agree with you that I didn't think it was going to happen today.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't the game. You know, like I said, losing to Chelsea really isn't the most damning thing. That was just the final nail in a culmination of difficult period. And I think that lack of progress is the real key thing to focus on, because it is something that he recognised they needed to be making, and it just didn't feel like they were when other teams are progressing around them.
I think it's going to be interesting now to see how Arsenal develop without Eidevall, whether actually he was so integral to kind of this sort of negative period that they're going through that actually it'll feel like a weight is lifted that he's gone, or actually you're going to see an Arsenal squad go into a bit of a state of disarray.
Interesting timing.
Without kind of that leadership. Obviously you've got Renee Salego, who admittedly I don't know too much about. The assistant coach at Arsenal now steps in as the interim, but to see what she can kind of achieve in this very kind of transitional period for Arsenal.
Yeah, they've got, Champions League tie this week, a tie they have to win.
Yep.
So they'll already know that. They already know the pressure's on. And then they've got West Ham away at the weekend. And, there's a risk of, do you keep Mon to win those 2 games and then he goes? Or do you say, if we don't win these 2 games, should we have let him go? And, you look at that West Ham game, that's where Arsenal dropped points last season, So it is a stick or twist kind of thing. You could, at least if they get rid of him, and they lose those games, they can say, well, we just got rid of the manager, the team's in a bit of disarray, blah, 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 blah. If they'd kept him, then they could be looking back going, should we have made that decision sooner?
And you also, sometimes you do see a bit of a transitional bounce. There's this kind of like dip where one manager leaves, obviously they don't have another manager yet in place, but that kind of dip where they sort of like, I don't know, have to prove themselves to another manager, and kind of you see competition levels and performance levels kind of step up initially. But we've got to talk about who we think might be the next replacement at Arsenal, because that is a big ass job. My thoughts, Casey Stoney.
I think everyone has been saying that.
It's just because I want it so much.
She's back. She was at the Arsenal game. It might be a surprise that no one really saw coming, or it might be Casey. It's interesting to see,
Rachel.
to see how long they take as well.
Okay.
That'll be interesting. And maybe the timing of not doing it in the international break gives them that extra week to nail down. I imagine they have someone in mind.
I think it's going to be really telling if they announce it tomorrow. Like, XX is the new head coach. They have clearly been having conversations for the past couple of months.
Yes, but part of me thinks the reason they've done it now is it gives them that international window to just get all their things in order.
Ducks
and maybe
in a row.
that's the phrase I was looking for. And maybe come international break, or when we get back from that, we might have a new person in place.
That is going to be huge. Like, I feel like the new Arsenal manager that's like the biggest job pretty much in the WSL bar Chelsea, I suppose. And like it does feel like what we've had a season now of Arsenal and Chelsea going through big managerial transition.
I do wonder, do you bring a new manager in and go, now you need to go and win something? Now you need to get us far in the Champions League. Now you need to make sure we retain that precious League Cup, or make sure that we get Champions League next season. Like, how much pressure will be put on this new manager? They've come in quite early. Although, Arsenal are sitting 6th in the league, it's not the absolute end of the world if they beat Chelsea and they beat Man City and essentially win every game.
We saw it a couple seasons ago. We saw Man City come back from 6 games on the bounce they lost or something like that, and then they came back to.
It's possible.
100%.
It's very difficult, but I do wonder how much pressure. Or will they bring a new manager in and go, see out the season, get us Champions League qualification next season, and then come next season it's shackles off?
I think it depends in what state the players are in. I think if it's a thing that it's not just the performance levels, it's also the culture at the club which needs to be shifted. Like, culture changes take a season to embed, at least. Like, trying to get in place new performance styles, there might be other new staff that are brought in, there might be, I don't know, changes happening in the January transfer window under a new manager, there might be a cultural shift. So I think if it's kind of like one of those big pieces, those big change pieces, I think this season should just be a transformative year rather than a let's put pressure on ourselves. But it is very early. It's very early to say, okay, well, let's just write off the year and let's just see it through and do what we can. As long as we're not relegated, cool. Like, absolutely not.
I think if it is Casey Stoney, she is a very good people manager. And I think some of these players need an arm around them.
For sure.
And I think she'll be very good at that. And it'll be nice to see her at a club packed, stacked with talent and not kind of massively lacking in any particular area. I think, you know, at the Wave, there were times where she was in desperate need of a really good number 9 or a really strong midfielder, and she wasn't really able to get what she needed. So whoever comes in, they're getting a stacked squad.
Yep.
They just need to work out how to get all of those pieces working together again.
For sure. I think there'll be something also quite beautiful about someone who's been there, done it, got the T-shirt at the Emirates, who obviously has a lot of like legendary status with players. I think, that, you know, for someone who's been through that criticism, who's been through those challenges, who's been through those barriers, some of which the Arsenal squad are now facing, I think, that could be a really good fit. So my bets are on Casey Stoney. This podcast could very quickly become very outdated when they actually eventually decide to choose Mark Parsons.